The rain hammered against the windows of the small, quiet cafe, blurring the world outside into a gray smear. Inside, the warmth of the shop felt like a sanctuary, a refuge from the cold, the chaos, and the memories that Tim Harris had been running from for the past year. The low hum of conversation from other customers and the soft clink of cups and saucers blended into the background, leaving Tim alone with his thoughts. He had chosen this place precisely because it was far from home, far from everything that reminded him of his old life. He needed distance from the pain, from the anger, from the betrayal. He had come here seeking peace, hoping that the slow rhythm of small-town life would give him the space to clear his head. But peace was a fleeting thing, especially when the past had a way of catching up with you when you least expected it. Tim had been sitting at a corner table for an hour, his mind a million miles away. He'd been nursing the same cup of coffee, his fingers absently tracing the edge of the chipped mug, as his thoughts drifted back to the life he had left behind. He hadn't been back home in months, not since the divorce. The house they had shared, the memories they had built together, were now just ghosts, empty spaces that echoed with a sadness he couldn't escape. His divorce from Lena had come as a shock. After all, they had been together for over a decade. They had built a life, built dreams. And then, in a single moment, it all shattered. Lena had left him for someone else. She had moved on with a man she'd met at her new job, a job that, from what Tim had gathered, had been the catalyst for everything that had gone wrong in their marriage. But it wasn't just the affair that had broken him, it was the way Lena had ended things. Coldly. Without remorse. Without explanation. She had simply walked away, leaving Tim to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. Tim took a deep breath, pushing the memories back. He had spent too long dwelling on the past. The sun had finally set, and the cafe had grown quieter, the evening crowd thinning out as the hours stretched into the night. Tim glanced at his watch and stood up, stretching his stiff legs. He needed to get back to his rented cabin. The isolation was beginning to get to him, and as much as he tried to deny it, he missed the connection he had once had with Lena, before everything had gone wrong. He missed her laugh, her presence, the way she could make him feel like everything was going to be okay. Tim was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't even hear the door chime as it opened. He was looking out the window, his gaze distant, the rain a soothing blur in his peripheral vision. But then something shifted in the air. The energy in the room changed. A shadow crossed his field of vision, and instinctively, he looked up. At first, he didn't recognize her. She was standing at the counter, her back to him, ordering drinks for a couple seated at a nearby table. The blonde hair that Tim once ran his fingers through, now pulled back into a tight, professional bun, framed her face in a way that seemed unfamiliar. The slender figure, the posture, the way she moved, everything about her was different. It had been over a year since he had last seen her, but in that moment, Tim knew. He recognized her immediately. Lena. His ex-wife. The woman who had once been his whole world. The woman who had torn his life apart without a second thought. Tim's heart skipped a beat, then raced in his chest. He stood frozen, unable to tear his eyes away from her. She was standing just a few feet away, moving with a casual grace behind the counter, taking orders, smiling politely, her demeanor cool and collected. But there was a tension in her posture, something that wasn't there before. She wasn't the carefree woman he had married, the one who laughed at his jokes and had dreams they had talked about late into the night. This Lena was different, hardened, distant, and cold. His mind raced with questions. Why was she here? What had happened to her? Was she still with that man, the one she had left him for? Why was she working in a cafe? After everything they had been through, after the mess of their divorce, the last thing Tim had expected was to find her working a minimum-wage job in some small-town cafe. Before he could process his shock, Lena turned, and for a brief moment, their eyes locked. The world seemed to stop. Tim felt the weight of that gaze, a fleeting recognition that sent a chill down his spine. Her eyes were no longer the warm, loving ones he had once known. They were guarded, distant, almost empty, as though everything that had once connected them had been erased. There was no warmth in her expression, no hint of apology, no sign of remorse. Lena didn't even blink. Her gaze was steady, almost as though she were trying to suppress the memories, trying to avoid the emotions that might surface if they acknowledged each other. After a long pause, she took a breath and spoke, her voice smooth, almost too calm. "Hi, can I take your order?" Tim's mind was spinning. He almost couldn't speak, his mouth dry, his thoughts a jumble of confusion, anger, and disbelief. How could she be so composed? How could she stand there, in front of him, acting like nothing had ever happened between them? It had been a year since their divorce, but the pain still felt raw, like it had happened yesterday. The betrayal, the lies, the way she had walked away from their life together without even looking back, it still haunted him. For a brief second, he was tempted to lash out, to ask her why she had done it, why she had left him, why she had broken his heart. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the exhaustion he felt in his bones, the way this whole encounter felt surreal. Like something out of a nightmare. Or maybe it was the fear that if he opened that door, if he let the anger out, there would be no going back. "Just a black coffee," Tim managed to say, his voice hoarse, betraying his calm exterior. Lena nodded without a word, turned, and walked away. As she walked behind the counter, Tim watched her, his gaze following every movement. There was something unsettling about the way she moved, something almost robotic, like she was going through the motions without truly being present. Her eyes flickered briefly toward him as she poured the coffee, but it was nothing more than a glance. There was no recognition of their shared history, no hint of the love they once had, no sign that the woman he had married even existed anymore. Tim tried to steady his breathing. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. He had come here to escape his past, to put the pieces of his life back together, and yet, here she was, standing before him like a ghost from that past. He couldn't escape it. No matter how far he ran, it seemed like he was always running in circles, always chasing something he could never outrun. Lena returned with the coffee, placing it in front of him without a word. Tim took the mug, his fingers brushing hers briefly. It was as if that small touch had sent a shock through him, jolting him back to reality. The woman who had once been his everything was now a stranger. A woman he didn't recognize. A woman who had walked away without looking back. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely audible. Lena gave a small nod, her eyes averted, and she quickly walked away to tend to another customer. Tim sat there for a moment, the coffee growing cold in his hands. His mind was spinning, his emotions a whirlwind of confusion and anger. He wanted to leave, to escape this place, to forget that he had ever crossed paths with her. But something held him there. Something told him this wasn't over, not by a long shot. As he sat in the silence, the cafe around him felt different. It wasn't just the rain outside or the flickering light above. It was the presence of Lena, the way she had looked at him, detached, cold. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than met the eye. What had happened to her? What had led her to this life? And most importantly, why had she come here, to this small town, to work as a waitress? The questions lingered in his mind, unanswered, as the night stretched on. Tim's fingers trembled as he placed his coffee cup back on the saucer, the warm liquid now long gone cold. He couldn't get the image of Lena out of his mind. It had only been a brief encounter, just a passing moment in time, but it felt like something much more significant, something he couldn't quite comprehend. His thoughts were a tangled mess, constantly looping back to the same question: why was she here? Why was she working at this little cafe in the middle of nowhere, as if nothing in the world had ever happened between them? Lena was no longer the woman he had married, no longer the woman who had once whispered her dreams into his ear late at night. She had become someone different, someone who seemed to wear a mask, hiding behind a facade that barely resembled the woman he had once known. The coldness in her eyes, the way she had turned away without so much as a second glance, it all spoke volumes. But what was the truth? What had happened in the time since their divorce? Tim's mind raced as he sat at the table, unable to shake the feeling that there was more to this encounter than met the eye. He wasn't sure why, but something told him this wasn't just a random coincidence. The universe didn't work in such strange ways for nothing. No, there was a deeper reason for why Lena was here, working in this small town, of all places. He sat back in his chair and sighed, staring out the window. The rain had stopped, but the night still held its grip on the town. The dim glow of streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, casting long shadows across the road. Tim's eyes wandered back to the counter, where Lena was busy serving another table, her movements swift and efficient. She seemed completely at ease in this new life, but Tim could sense that something wasn't right. It was as if she were trapped in some sort of routine, a life she didn't want but couldn't escape. The questions kept piling up in his mind, each one more pressing than the last. He couldn't just walk away without answers, not after everything they had been through. And so, despite the unease gnawing at him, Tim decided to stay. He wasn't going to leave until he knew the truth. It was nearly an hour later when he saw Lena again. The cafe was quieter now, with only a few patrons scattered around the room. Tim noticed that Lena had started to clean the tables, wiping them down with a cloth, lost in her work. There was something almost mechanical about the way she moved, like she was going through the motions, but her mind was elsewhere. Tim took a deep breath, stood up, and made his way toward the counter. His heart was pounding in his chest as he approached her. He wasn't sure what he was going to say, but he knew he had to say something. He couldn't just sit in silence, pretending that nothing had happened. Lena looked up when she saw him approaching, her expression neutral. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and Tim could see a flicker of something in her gaze, something that wasn't anger or indifference, but something deeper. Something like recognition. "Hi," Tim said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "Can we talk?" Lena didn't say anything at first. She simply nodded, and to his surprise, motioned for him to follow her. Without another word, she led him to a small, dimly lit back room of the cafe. It was an office of sorts, a place where she could store her belongings. Or catch a break from the hectic pace of the cafe. The room smelled faintly of cleaning supplies and stale coffee, a far cry from the warm, inviting atmosphere of the front. Lena closed the door behind them and crossed her arms, leaning against the wall. She didn't seem particularly interested in talking, but there was a hint of something, tension, maybe, in the way she held herself. Tim stood in front of her, unsure of how to start. The years of bitterness and anger from their failed marriage swirled inside him, but he knew that wasn't going to get them anywhere. He had to know why she was here, why she had ended their marriage the way she had. And, most importantly, he needed to understand what had happened to the woman he had once loved. "Why are you here?" Tim asked, his voice quiet but firm. "What happened to you, Lena? This isn't where you belong." Lena's gaze flickered for a moment, and for the briefest of seconds, Tim could see the mask slip, the vulnerability that lay beneath it. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. She straightened up and let out a long sigh, rubbing her forehead as if the question itself was exhausting. "Why does it matter?" Lena replied, her tone surprisingly flat. "We're not together anymore, Tim. I'm just trying to live my life." Tim could feel the walls going up, but he wasn't about to give up. "I don't understand. After everything we went through, after what happened, I thought you'd want to move on. This," he gestured vaguely to the room around them, "this isn't what you've worked for. What happened to you?" Lena's eyes softened, but she didn't speak for a long time. Tim waited, his own heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what to expect next. Finally, Lena sighed again, and when she spoke, her voice was almost too quiet to hear. "I never wanted this, Tim. You think I chose this life? You think I wanted to end up working as a waitress in a place like this? Her voice cracked, just slightly, and for a moment, Tim could almost feel the weight of her words. You think I wanted to hurt you? I didn't. I didn't want to destroy everything we had. But you never understood me. You never really knew me, Tim. You didn't see the signs. You didn't see the way I was suffocating in our marriage. Tim felt a pang of guilt shoot through him. His mind flashed back to their life together, those years of happiness, but also those years where things had started to unravel. The late nights when Lena had seemed distant, the fights that had become more frequent, the silent tension that had grown between them like an unspoken rift. But he had been too wrapped up in his own frustrations, his own hurt, to see it. I tried to make things work, Tim said quietly. I thought we were happy. I didn't see you struggling. Lena shook her head, a bitter smile playing at the corners of her lips. That's just it, Tim. You never saw me. You saw what you wanted to see. I was never happy, not really. Not with you. Not with the life we had. I was drowning in our marriage, but I kept pretending everything was fine. You never noticed. You didn't listen. Her words stung more than Tim expected. It wasn't anger or blame in her voice, but a quiet sadness, one that cut deeper than anything she could have said in a fit of rage. The truth was, he hadn't seen it. He hadn't seen the cracks forming until they had already shattered. I wasn't happy either, Tim confessed, his voice barely a whisper. But I didn't know how to fix it. I thought we were just going through a rough patch. Lena's eyes softened then, but only for a second. You wouldn't have understood. You were too focused on your own pain to see mine. And when I met someone else, when I found someone who listened, I thought maybe I could finally breathe again. Tim felt a sharp stab of betrayal. You left me for him, didn't you? His voice cracked despite himself. You just walked away. Like I didn't matter. Lena's face hardened again, and she looked away, a deep frown creasing her brow. It wasn't like that. I didn't leave you to hurt you, Tim. I left because I had to. Because I needed to find myself. And the truth is, I'm still trying to figure that out. For a moment, the room was silent, the weight of their words hanging between them like an invisible fog. Tim could feel the sting of the past in every inch of his body, but he also felt something else. Something he couldn't quite place. Maybe it was the realization that Lena had been just as lost as he had been. Maybe it was the understanding that they had both been too broken to fix each other. I'm sorry, Tim, Lena finally said, her voice small. I'm sorry for everything. I never meant to hurt you. Tim swallowed hard, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't fully comprehend. But in that moment, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to admit before. He was angry. He was hurt. But he also understood. He understood that their marriage had been doomed from the start, not because of the people they were, but because of the things they never talked about. I don't know what to say, Tim whispered. I don't know if I can forgive you. Lena nodded, her eyes filling with something like resignation. I don't expect you to. I don't expect anything. I'm just trying to survive. And in that moment, Tim realized that Lena wasn't the same woman he had once known. She was a woman broken by circumstances, just like him. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Something deeper was at play. Something neither of them fully understood yet. The cafe felt eerily quiet as Tim sat across from Lena, the weight of their conversation hanging heavily in the air. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, and for a moment, Tim wondered if he had made a mistake by pressing her to talk. But there was no turning back now. The questions in his mind refused to stay silent, just as the bitterness of the past refused to be buried under the weight of time. Lena's words echoed in his head. I'm still trying to figure it out, she had said. He had heard the pain in her voice, seen the vulnerability in her eyes. For a fleeting second, Tim had felt the walls between them begin to crumble, but just as quickly, they were rebuilt, stronger and more impenetrable than before. Lena had walked away once, and now she stood at an emotional distance, perhaps even farther than before. "How did it come to this, Lena?" Tim asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did we go from what we had to this?" His heart ached as he spoke the words. They had been so much more than just a marriage, they had been partners, friends, dreamers. The life they had built together had once felt unbreakable. And yet, it had shattered so quickly. Lena sat back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. She looked at him for a long moment, as though weighing whether to speak the truth or to hide it behind a shield. Her face was a mask of cold indifference, but her eyes betrayed the storm swirling inside her. "You want the truth, Tim?" she asked, her voice rough, like she had just swallowed something bitter. "It didn't happen overnight. It wasn't just one thing. It was years of little things. Little cracks that slowly started to widen. And one day, they couldn't be ignored anymore." Tim's heart sank as he listened. He wanted to deny her words, to argue that it wasn't true, that they hadn't just been a collection of broken pieces, but something stronger. But deep down, he knew. He had felt the cracks too, the slow, steady distance that had grown between them. Maybe he hadn't been paying attention to them, maybe he had ignored them out of fear or pride, but the cracks were there, undeniable. Lena exhaled deeply, and her gaze softened. "Do you remember the night I left? The night I told you I was done?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost wistful. Tim nodded, the memory flooding back in an instant. It had been one of the worst nights of his life. The argument that had escalated until Lena couldn't take it anymore, the tears she had shed, and the cold finality in her words as she packed her things and walked out. He had begged her to stay, but she had refused. And the door had slammed behind her, echoing through the emptiness of their home. "I remember," Tim replied softly. "I remember it all too well." Lena looked down, her fingers drumming lightly on the table as though lost in thought. "I wasn't just leaving you, Tim. I was leaving myself. I was trapped in a life that wasn't mine anymore. I was so caught up in trying to make you happy, trying to fix everything, that I lost who I was. I didn't know who I was anymore, Tim. I felt like I was suffocating." The words hit Tim harder than he expected. He had always believed that Lena had left him because of some affair, because of some deep betrayal. But here, in this small room, with the quiet hum of the cafe's distant noise filling the space between them, he was hearing something different. Lena had been suffocating, too. She hadn't just been running away from their marriage, she had been running from herself. "I didn't know, Lena," Tim said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't know you were suffocating. I thought I was the one who was hurting. I thought you didn't care anymore, that you were just gone." Lena lifted her eyes to meet his, her expression softening, almost as if she could feel his pain. "I know you didn't. And that's the problem, Tim. We both thought the other person was fine. We both assumed that we were the only ones suffering." The silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't as suffocating. There was a kind of understanding in the air, something that neither of them had acknowledged before. They had both been so focused on their own pain, so blinded by their own hurt, that they had failed to see each other. They had failed to see what was really happening. "So, what now?" Tim asked, his voice heavy. "What happens after all of this? After everything we've been through? Can we ever go back to what we had?" Lena's face was unreadable, her lips pressed into a thin line. She shook her head slowly. "I don't know, Tim. I don't think we can go back. We can't erase what's happened. We can't change the past." Tim nodded, a sense of resignation settling over him. He knew she was right. They couldn't go back. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies or explanations could undo the pain they had caused each other. But as much as it hurt, Tim also realized something important. Maybe it wasn't about going back. Maybe it was about moving forward. "I've been running from the past, too," Tim admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "I thought that if I could just get away, if I could just put enough distance between myself and everything that happened, I could forget it. I thought I could just bury it all." Lena's eyes softened as she listened to him. "You can't bury it, Tim. You can't outrun it forever. You have to face it. You have to deal with it." Tim swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking in. He had spent so much time in isolation, in anger, blaming her for everything that had gone wrong. But now, here, with Lena sitting in front of him, he realized something. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't looking for someone to blame. He was simply trying to make sense of it all. Trying to understand why everything had fallen apart. "I don't know how to move on," Tim confessed. "I don't know how to let go of all the hurt." Lena gave him a small, sad smile. "Neither do I, Tim. But I think we're both trying. And that's something, right?" Tim returned her smile weakly, the small flicker of hope in her words resonating with him. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, or if there was even a future for the two of them. But for the first time since their divorce, he felt like they were standing on the same ground, both broken, both struggling. But also both trying to heal. There was a long pause, and Tim's mind wandered back to that night, the night Lena had left. The night his world had turned upside down. He had never understood why she had made that choice, why she had walked away without looking back. But now, as he sat across from her, listening to her speak, he could see it. She had left not because she didn't love him, but because she loved herself enough to leave a life that was no longer her own. The realization hit him like a wave, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't about forgiveness. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about understanding. About accepting that sometimes people needed to break free in order to find themselves again. "Lena," Tim began, his voice steady now. "I don't know what this means for us. I don't know if we can fix what's broken. But I think I finally understand why you left. Anne. I think I can forgive you. Not because it's easy, but because I see now that we were both just lost." Lena's eyes filled with something soft, gratefulness, maybe. She nodded slowly, as though she had been waiting for those words, those small steps toward healing. "I've missed you, Tim," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know what happens next, but I've missed you." Tim felt a rush of emotion, a tide of memories and longing flooding over him. He wasn't sure where this road would lead them, or if it would lead anywhere at all. But in that moment, he realized something crucial. Maybe the only way forward was through understanding, not blame. Through forgiveness, not anger. And maybe, just maybe, they could start to rebuild. Not a marriage. Not a life they once had. But something new. They had both been broken. But together, maybe they could begin to heal. The weeks that followed their conversation at the cafe were filled with quiet tension. Tim couldn't shake the image of Lena from his mind, nor could he fully put behind the weight of the revelation they had shared. Her admission of suffocating in their marriage, the pain she had felt, and the things left unsaid, it all hung like a shadow over him. The idea of moving forward, of building something new, felt impossible at times. But somehow, each passing day allowed him to take small steps toward healing, both in his personal life and in his understanding of what had gone wrong. Lena had started to open up more, telling him stories about her life since they had separated. She worked 2 jobs, one at the cafe and another at a local bookstore, trying to piece together a life she had once thought was lost. She had met people, made new friends, and even started seeing someone else, though she kept those details vague. Her reluctance to discuss that part of her life made Tim uncomfortable, but he understood. It wasn't easy for either of them to navigate the boundaries of their new relationship, whatever it was. Or to grapple with the ghosts of the past that continued to haunt them. For Tim, the struggle was real. He couldn't just forget the history they shared, the love they once had, and the way it had all crumbled in an instant. The pain of their divorce, the betrayal of trust, and the way Lena had walked away had carved deep scars in his heart. But something had shifted in him. Something about Lena's vulnerability, her honesty, had begun to erode the walls of anger and resentment he had spent years building around himself. One late afternoon, Tim found himself sitting in his small apartment, his feet propped up on the coffee table as he scrolled aimlessly through his phone. The late fall wind whistled outside, rattling the windows. A storm was brewing, and it matched his mood perfectly. The silence in the apartment was suffocating, just as it had been the day he had packed his bags and left their shared home years ago. It wasn't just the space that felt empty, but the ache in his chest that never seemed to disappear. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a message from Lena, and for some reason, his heart skipped a beat when he saw her name. "Can we talk? Meet me at the cafe. I need to explain something to you." Tim's brow furrowed. He hadn't heard from Lena in a couple of days, and the abruptness of her message made him uneasy. There was something in her words that felt urgent. He couldn't put his finger on it, but it seemed like this conversation was different from the others they had had. Without thinking, he stood up, grabbed his jacket, and made his way to the cafe. The familiar walk felt like a routine now, even though the cafe had become a place of unexpected revelations for him in the past. His mind raced with questions. What could Lena possibly need to explain? Was it something about her new life, or something to do with the past? Whatever it was, Tim had the sense that it would change everything. As he entered the cafe, the warm, earthy smell of brewed coffee filled the air. The usual hum of quiet chatter and clinking cups filled the space, but it felt quieter than usual. The patrons were scattered, lost in their own worlds. Lena was behind the counter, wiping down the surface of the coffee machine with practiced efficiency. She glanced up when she saw him, offering a small, almost hesitant smile. "Tim," she said softly, nodding toward the small table in the back where they had talked last time. "Come on, let's sit. I don't want to keep you waiting." Tim followed her, his nerves on edge. The quiet intensity of the situation weighed heavily on him as they sat down. Lena didn't waste any time. She looked at him with a mixture of determination and something else, fear, maybe? Tim couldn't quite tell. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Lena began, her voice quiet. "About everything. I know we've talked about what happened before, but I need to tell you something. Something I've been hiding for a long time." Tim's stomach clenched at her words. He leaned forward, instinctively bracing himself for whatever came next. He had spent so many years buried in his own pain that he wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever Lena was about to reveal. "There's something you don't know," she continued, her eyes fixed on the table. "Something I never told you. Something I've kept buried because I thought it would destroy everything. But I can't keep hiding it anymore." Tim felt a chill creep up his spine. His breath caught in his throat. What could she possibly say that would change everything again? "What is it, Lena?" he asked, his voice tight. Lena took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she placed them on the table. She looked up at him, and for the first time in their conversations, there was a raw vulnerability in her eyes, a fear that she hadn't shown before. "I didn't leave you just because I was unhappy," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I left because of something I discovered. Something that changed everything for me." Tim's mind raced, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean? What did you discover?" Lena hesitated, and for a moment, Tim thought she might pull back. But then she spoke, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I discovered that I couldn't trust you anymore. Not because of anything you did directly, but because of something I found out. Something I didn't want to believe." I found out that you were keeping secrets from me. Big secrets. And that changed everything. Tim's heart stopped. He felt the blood drain from his face. His mind whirled, trying to make sense of what she was saying. Secrets? What secrets? What was she talking about? I don't understand, he said, his voice hoarse. What secrets? Lena, what are you talking about? Lena's eyes filled with tears, and she blinked rapidly to keep them from falling. I found out about the money, Tim. The money you were hiding. The accounts, the investments, everything. The things you were doing behind my back. Tim stared at her, stunned. His mind went blank for a moment, as if he were hearing her words from a distant place, not quite able to process them. I don't know what you're talking about, Tim said, his voice rising slightly. What money? What accounts? Lena wiped her eyes, trying to calm herself. You thought I wouldn't find out. But I did. I found out when I went through some of your things, after you left. I found bank statements that didn't match anything you'd ever told me. I found documents about offshore accounts, investments in properties that we never discussed. There was money being transferred to places I couldn't even trace. It was all there, Tim. Right in front of me. Tim's mind reeled. He couldn't breathe. The secrets Lena was talking about, they didn't make sense. Yes, there had been money, he had been dealing with some investments in the background, but nothing that was supposed to be kept from her. Everything was supposed to be transparent. He had never intended to keep anything from her, not the money, not the investments. But hearing Lena's words, he realized that something didn't add up. I didn't hide anything from you, Tim said, his voice trembling. I never kept anything from you on purpose. If there's anything, I can explain it, No, Tim, Lena interrupted, her voice firm but laced with pain. You don't get it. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the lies. It was about the trust that was broken. I don't care about the money. What mattered to me was that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. You didn't trust me enough to share it with me. You shut me out of your life, even when we were still together. Tim's breath caught in his throat as the weight of her words sank in. The realization hit him harder than he could have imagined. All those years, all those nights when they had argued, when they had drifted apart, he had never realized how deep the rift had grown. He hadn't known that something as simple as his secrecy, his desire to shield her from the complexities of his work, had destroyed the trust between them. I'm sorry, Tim whispered, his voice breaking. I never meant for it to hurt you. I never meant to push you away. I thought I was protecting you from the stress of everything, but I see now that I was just making it worse. Lena looked at him with tears in her eyes, but she didn't speak for a long time. She just stared at him, as if searching for something. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter now. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for that, Tim. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand why I left. It wasn't just because I was unhappy. It was because you made me feel like I couldn't trust you anymore. Tim's heart shattered as the full weight of her words sank in. He had lost her, not just because of their differences, but because of the secrets he had kept. The thing that had broken them wasn't just a lack of communication or love, it was the erosion of trust. And now, standing across from her, he realized that some things, once broken, could never truly be fixed. The wind howled outside, a fierce gust shaking the windows of the cafe, as though nature itself was echoing the turbulence that churned inside Tim. Lena's words, "You made me feel like I couldn't trust you anymore," reverberated in his ears, drowning out the background noise of the bustling cafe. Tim's chest tightened, and for a moment, he felt like he couldn't breathe. What had started as an attempt at reconciliation, a fragile hope of healing, had suddenly shattered into pieces. He had wanted to understand Lena, to rebuild some semblance of a relationship, whatever that might look like, but he now realized that the rift between them went deeper than he had ever imagined. Lena's revelation had hit him like a hammer, each word a blow that cracked his understanding of everything they had shared. She hadn't just left because of their fading love, as he had believed. She had left because of a betrayal, one that had been decades in the making, hidden behind the carefully constructed walls of their lives. Tim had never been the type to lie, at least not about the big things. Yet here, in front of him, was a woman who felt deceived, who felt the sting of his silence, of his secrets. He didn't know how to respond. Words seemed inadequate, hollow, as if he could never explain himself fully. Not because he didn't want to, but because he now understood that sometimes explanations are too late. The damage was done, the trust shattered. Lena, sensing his turmoil, sighed deeply and looked away. "I didn't want to hurt you, Tim. But I couldn't live in a lie anymore. I needed the truth." She shifted in her chair, her fingers wrapped tightly around the coffee cup in front of her, as though grounding herself. "I didn't expect you to come back with an explanation, not anymore. But I wanted to say it, because you deserve to know." Tim's throat constricted, and for a moment, he was too ashamed to look her in the eye. This woman, who had once been his partner in everything, now seemed like a stranger. It was as if the years had erased every line, every shared memory, and replaced them with a gulf too vast to cross. But still, his heart ached to know the truth. Even if it hurt, he needed it. He owed her that much. "I didn't know how much I was hiding," Tim said finally, his voice rough. "I thought I was keeping everything under control. But I see now. I was drowning us in secrecy, in things you didn't deserve to know. I thought I was protecting you, but I was only pushing you further away." Lena met his gaze, her eyes searching his face, as though looking for any trace of the man she had once loved, the man she thought she knew. "I'm not angry at you, Tim," she said quietly. "I'm angry at myself. For staying for so long, for letting things go on the way they did. I should have confronted you sooner, I should have asked more questions. But I didn't." Tim shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "We both failed, Lena. We both let it go too far." He paused, swallowing against the lump in his throat. "I thought that if I kept my distance from the chaos of my work, kept things under wraps, it would somehow keep you safe. But I didn't realize I was hurting you in the process. I never meant for that." Lena nodded, but there was no anger in her expression, only resignation, as though she had long since given up on finding the answers she sought. "You didn't mean to, but that doesn't change what happened." "I know," Tim replied. "I know." The conversation drifted into silence again, both of them lost in their thoughts, neither sure where to go from here. There was so much more left unsaid, so much still hanging in the air between them. The questions kept coming, circling like vultures waiting for something more. But Tim was afraid. Afraid of what might come next. Afraid of what would happen if Lena dug any deeper. What if the truth, the real truth, was even worse than what had already been revealed? He glanced at Lena, and despite the ache in his chest, he couldn't help but feel a pang of relief. It wasn't much, but it was something. She hadn't left. She was still here, still listening, still holding on to whatever shred of their past they could salvage. For now, that was enough. "So what now?" Tim asked quietly, leaning forward slightly. His eyes never left hers. "Where do we go from here? Do we just walk away again? Is that it?" Lena exhaled slowly, her fingers drumming lightly on the edge of the coffee cup. "I don't know, Tim. I wish I had the answers. But I don't. All I know is that I can't keep living in the past. I need to move forward. And maybe we need to figure out who we are now, without all the history that's been weighing us down." Tim nodded, absorbing her words. He wasn't sure if he was ready to completely let go of the past, if he was capable of leaving the hurt and betrayal behind, but he knew she was right. Whatever had happened between them, it couldn't stay in the past forever. They both had to find a way to move forward. But the question was, together or apart? "I don't know how to do that," Tim admitted, his voice trembling. "I don't know how to move on from what's happened. How do we rebuild trust after everything?" Lena's gaze softened, and for the first time in what felt like years, she reached out and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm, comforting, as if she understood the depth of his pain, even though she had been hurt just as much. "We don't rebuild it overnight, Tim. We don't erase the past just like that." She paused, her thumb gently stroking his hand. "But we can start. One step at a time." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Tim allowed himself to believe in that possibility. One step at a time. Maybe that was all they could do. The idea of moving forward, of rebuilding something, seemed impossible at times. But it was a choice. A choice they both had to make, every day. Just then, the door of the cafe swung open with a sharp creak, and a gust of cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain. Tim turned instinctively to look at the entrance. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dimming light of the late afternoon. The person hesitated for a moment, scanning the room, before stepping inside. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered leather jacket. His presence immediately felt out of place in the cozy warmth of the cafe. Lena stiffened slightly beside Tim, her face pale as she looked at the man. Tim could see the recognition in her eyes, and a wave of unease washed over him. Something about this man, this unexpected appearance, felt wrong. "Lena," the man said, his voice low and gravelly. There was an edge to it, something unsettling that sent a chill down Tim's spine. "We need to talk. It's about the money." Lena's face drained of color, and she quickly pulled her hand away from Tim's. Her eyes flicked to Tim, her lips trembling as she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know who you are, but you need to leave. Now." But the man didn't move. He took a step forward, his eyes locked on Lena. "You don't understand. You're in danger. And so is he." Tim's heart dropped to his stomach as the words echoed in the room. Danger? What was this man talking about? Lena stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What the hell are you talking about?" she demanded, her voice shaking now. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, tossing it onto the table between them. It landed with a dull thud, the sound cutting through the tension in the air. "You've got no idea what you're really dealing with, Lena. And neither does he," the man said ominously, his gaze now shifting to Tim. "But you will soon enough." Lena took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. "You need to leave. This isn't about money anymore. This is about something far worse." The man shook his head slowly, a dark smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You think you can just walk away from this? From everything that's happened?" His voice was low, almost menacing. "You've got no idea what you've gotten yourselves into." The envelope lay between them, its edges slightly crumpled from the rough toss. Tim could feel his heart racing in his chest as he tried to make sense of the situation. The man in the doorway wasn't someone who could be easily dismissed. His presence was an immediate threat, and the look in his eyes told Tim that something far darker was unfolding. Lena stood stiffly beside him, her hands trembling, her face a pale mask of confusion and fear. Tim could see that this man, whoever he was someone from her past, someone she clearly feared. "But why? What do you mean, danger?" Tim's voice broke through the tension. He was trying to sound calm, to assert some sense of control, but the words felt hollow as they left his mouth. His mind was spinning, trying to piece together the puzzle he didn't even know he was a part of. The man's cryptic message echoed in his ears, "You don't know what you're really dealing with." Tim's pulse quickened. What did that even mean? The man took a few slow steps toward them, his eyes never leaving Lena. I've told you before, Lena. There are things you don't understand. People you've crossed, things that go much deeper than what you think you know. He stopped just short of the table, his gaze now flicking to the envelope. Open it. It'll explain everything. Lena hesitated, but Tim could see the hesitation in her eyes too. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. She knew the stakes. She knew exactly who this man was. And for reasons Tim couldn't comprehend, he had no idea what he was walking into. Everything he thought he understood about their past was starting to crumble. Lena swallowed hard, her hand hovering over the envelope but not daring to touch it. I don't need to open it. I already know what's inside. Her voice quivered, as though the words themselves could bring the world crashing down on them. Tim's eyes flicked between the man and Lena, trying to piece together what he was missing. Lena, what's going on? Who is this? The man gave a short, dry laugh. I'm just a messenger, Tim. But if you want to know the truth, ask her. Ask her why she really left you. Lena recoiled, as though the man's words physically stung. She glanced at Tim, but there was no longer the openness that had once existed between them. Her face was a mask of guarded emotion. Lena, what is he talking about? Tim's voice had grown desperate, but it wasn't for the answers to the questions he could ask now. He didn't want to know about the money or the secrets anymore. What he needed was for Lena to explain. What had this man meant to her? Why had she never mentioned him? What did he want from them? And most importantly, what was the truth behind the mysterious envelope he had tossed on the table? Lena swallowed and slowly reached for the envelope, her fingers trembling. It was clear that whatever was inside, it held more than just answers. It held a truth neither of them could escape. She opened it slowly, the faint sound of paper tearing the only noise in the otherwise silent cafe. As she unfolded the contents, her face went pale. Tim couldn't tell if it was shock or fear that gripped her. What is it? Tim asked, his voice urgent. Lena didn't speak at first. She simply stared at the contents of the envelope, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. Tim could see that her whole body was tense, as if she were bracing herself for something catastrophic. Lena, please, Tim said again, his voice now a whisper. He reached across the table, his hand resting on hers, his thumb gently pressing into her skin as if trying to anchor her. But she didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the papers in front of her, and Tim could feel her fear, the same fear he had seen when the man entered the cafe. Finally, Lena looked up, her eyes wide with terror. Tim, we need to get out of here. Now. The urgency in her voice sent a chill through Tim's spine. He didn't need any more explanations, he could see that something dangerous was unfolding. But before he could ask anything else, the man who had been watching them from the doorway stepped forward, blocking the exit. His gaze never wavered from Lena. You can run, Lena. You can try to hide from this all you want. But the truth always catches up with you, the man said with a cold smile. His voice was like ice, and there was something chillingly familiar about his demeanor. It was as if he was playing a role in something much larger, something dark that had been years in the making. Lena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Don't you dare threaten me. Her voice was hoarse, and Tim could hear the tremor of panic beneath the anger. This is over. Leave us alone. But the man shook his head slowly, his face darkening. You think you can just walk away from this? After everything you've done? He stepped forward, moving dangerously close to Lena. There are people who don't forget, Lena. You've crossed a line. And now they want their money back. Tim's confusion deepened as he looked at Lena. Her expression was one of helplessness, but there was something else, regret, maybe? What money? He demanded. What are you talking about? Who are you? Lena's eyes met his, and for the first time since their reunion, there was a wall between them, one Tim couldn't break through. She opened her mouth to speak but stopped short as the man pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. "Listen, Tim. You're not part of this. You're not supposed to be here. But it's too late for you now." His eyes flicked over to the door. "The people who want their money aren't going to let you go that easily. You've both made your choices. And now you'll live with the consequences." Tim stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of the man's words pressed down on him like a heavy fog. He wasn't just talking about money. This was something much bigger, something dangerous. But what could they do now? What choice did they have? "Please, tell me what's going on, Lena," Tim begged, his voice hoarse. He wanted to shake her, to make her understand that they were running out of time, that they had no more options. But she didn't answer. Instead, she turned her gaze to the man and nodded almost imperceptibly. "I didn't want you involved, Tim," she whispered. "But I should have told you everything. I should have never kept it from you." The man gave a curt nod, his lips curling into a dark smile. "That's the problem with secrets. They always come back to bite you." A loud crash interrupted the moment. The door to the cafe slammed open, and two more figures stepped inside. They were dressed in dark suits, their faces hidden beneath the shadows of the room. One of them held a briefcase, the other a gun. Tim's heart skipped a beat. Lena recoiled, her face pale as she saw the new arrivals. "No," she whispered, as if in disbelief. "This can't be happening." The man who had been speaking to them looked back over his shoulder at the newcomers and nodded grimly. "It's time." The man with the gun stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Lena and Tim. "You two have no idea the mess you found yourselves in. And now, there's no way out." Tim's breath caught in his throat. He knew, instinctively, that this was no longer about money or betrayal. This was about survival. Their survival. He turned to Lena, his heart pounding. "Lena, what do we do?" Lena's eyes were filled with fear, real, raw fear. She had no answers, no plans. She was just as trapped as he was. Her voice was a whisper. "I don't know, Tim. I don't know." But the man with the gun didn't wait for an answer. His eyes flicked to the other two men, then back at Tim and Lena. He took another step forward, his fingers tightening around the grip of the weapon. "You can't run from this," he said coldly. "Not anymore." Lena grabbed Tim's arm, her grip fierce. "Run, Tim. Now." Tim didn't hesitate. He pulled her toward the back of the cafe, past the kitchen, his heart racing as adrenaline flooded his system. They had no plan, no way to escape, but they couldn't stay. Not now. The sound of footsteps behind them, of their pursuers closing in, echoed in the dark hallway. It was too late to turn back.